Emmylou Harris has always seemed like an artist who sings about closeness while personally living at a distance, a woman whose music feels intimate even when her life often unfolded in solitude. Listeners hear warmth, tenderness, and devotion in her voice, yet her own journey has rarely followed a simple or comfortable line. Rather than a straight path toward fame and fulfillment, her life has been marked by difficult choices, long stretches of independence, and a constant negotiation between personal stability and creative freedom. What makes her story compelling is not tragedy, but honesty, the willingness to accept that devotion to art sometimes asks for sacrifices that cannot easily be reversed. In her later years, when many performers retreat into private family circles, Harris remained closely tied to music itself. Not because she lacked connection, but because music had always been the language through which she felt most completely understood and most fully herself. Childhood in motion and emotional discipline. Born in Birmingham, Alabama, into a military family, Emmylou Harris grew up in an environment shaped by duty, relocation, and quiet resilience. Her father's military service meant that the family moved frequently, and each new city required her to adapt quickly, form temporary friendships, and learn the art of observation rather than self-exposure. This constant motion built independence early, but it also cultivated a reserved emotional style, a habit of carrying feelings inward instead of expressing them freely. Stability was never guaranteed, and discipline often replaced open conversation. Yet, within that structure, seeds of sensitivity took root. She learned to listen carefully, to notice small emotional shifts in people and places, and to hold on to inner calm even when surroundings changed. These early experiences quietly shaped the voice the world would later admire. A voice capable of conveying depth without force, sadness without despair, and strength without loudness. Education, acting, and the discovery of music. Harris initially stepped into adulthood with academic promise and artistic curiosity rather than a clear musical ambition. Excelling in school, she entered university with the intention of studying drama, believing acting might offer a structured creative outlet. On stage, she learned control, how to project her voice, manage movement, and inhabit a character's emotional landscape. Yet music lingered in the background as a more instinctive companion, something she played casually, almost privately, without expectation. Over time, the contrast became clear. Acting demanded precision and preparation, while singing flowed naturally, requiring honesty more than technique. Leaving college was not a reckless leap, but a quiet realization that her truest expression did not lie in scripted roles. The guitar became less a hobby and more a confidant, allowing her to voice feelings that ordinary conversation rarely reached. In that shift, music transformed from pastime into personal language. Early struggles and the reality of responsibility. The late 1960s brought both creative hope and personal responsibility, placing Harris in a position familiar to many young artists, balancing dreams with the demands of everyday life. Early performances in small venues provided modest income but immense learning, exposing her to audiences seeking sincerity more than polish. Marriage and motherhood arrived during this uncertain period, creating a powerful emotional divide between nurturing a child and pursuing a career that required late nights and travel. The tension was not dramatic but deeply human, the recognition that love for family and love for art could pull in different directions. Decisions made during this time were not about choosing one over the other, but about survival, stability, and long-term possibility. These years strengthened her resilience, teaching her that growth often occurs not through applause, but through perseverance, quiet endurance, and the courage to continue even when the path ahead remains unclear. Finding artistic direction through collaboration. A turning point in Harris's journey came through creative partnerships that expanded her musical identity and introduced her to broader audiences. Collaborating with established musicians allowed her to explore the blend of folk sensitivity and country storytelling that would later define her style. These collaborations were not about overshadowing or being overshadowed, they were about shared vision and mutual respect. In the studio, her voice revealed a rare balance, gentle yet unwavering, emotional yet composed. The experience confirmed that her strength did not lie in vocal power alone, but in interpretation, in the subtle ability to let a lyric breathe. Working alongside strong creative personalities also taught her the value of artistic boundaries and independence. Through these partnerships, She gained confidence not merely as a supporting harmony, but as a central presence capable of shaping musical direction while still honoring the collaborative spirit that enriched her sound. Breakthrough albums and rising recognition. The mid-1970s marked the period when Harris's work reached wider recognition, propelled by albums that showcased both technical refinement and emotional authenticity. Her recordings resonated because they felt lived in rather than manufactured, offering listeners stories delivered with empathy rather than performance bravado. Success brought visibility, yet it also introduced new pressures. The expectation to repeat triumphs, maintain chart positions, and navigate industry demands without losing personal voice. What distinguished Harris during this ascent was restraint. She rarely relied on spectacle or trend, instead allowing her interpretations to carry the weight. Audiences responded to that sincerity, finding comfort in songs that sounded less like commercial products and more like personal letters. This era established her not simply as a successful singer, but as an artist with a recognizable emotional signature, someone whose music provided reassurance that vulnerability and strength could coexist gracefully, balancing relationships and creative intensity. As professional momentum accelerated, Harris faced the complex reality that creative dedication can strain personal relationships. Partnerships formed through shared artistic vision sometimes struggled under the relentless pace of touring, recording, and public expectation. The challenge was not lack of affection, but lack of time, the gradual realization that constant motion leaves little room for stillness. Rather than dramatic conflicts, many separations emerge from accumulated fatigue and shifting priorities. Harris often approached these transitions with reflection rather than bitterness, understanding that personal chapters could end without erasing their meaning. Her experiences revealed a broader truth about artistic life. Devotion to craft can be deeply fulfilling, yet it requires boundaries to preserve emotional balance. Instead of retreating from music during difficult periods, she allowed her songs to become spaces of understanding, turning private complexities into shared emotional experiences for listeners who recognize their own stories within hers. Reinvention and the courage to evolve. In later decades, Harris demonstrated a willingness to reinvent her sound rather than remain confined by earlier success. Moving toward more atmospheric and introspective musical styles, she collaborated with producers who valued texture and emotional space over radio-friendly formulas. This evolution was less about abandoning tradition and more about expanding it, proving that maturity can deepen artistic relevance rather than diminish it. Albums from this period reflected introspection, layered storytelling, and a voice that carried the subtle marks of time without losing clarity. Critics and devoted fans recognized this phase as courageous, an affirmation that authenticity matters more than commercial predictability. By embracing change, Harris showed that longevity in music depends not on repeating youth, but on embracing growth. Her willingness to explore new sonic landscapes ensured that her work remained fresh, meaningful, and emotionally resonant across generations. Enduring legacy and emotional honesty. Emmylou Harris's legacy rests not solely on awards or chart positions, but on the emotional honesty she consistently brought to her music. She expanded the boundaries of country and folk traditions without rejecting their roots, weaving vulnerability into genres often associated with fixed formulas. Her influence extends beyond sound. It lies in the example she set for future artists, proof that authenticity can outlast trends, and that evolution need not erase identity. She showed that contradictions within a life do not weaken artistry. They enrich it, providing depth that audiences feel instinctively. Through decades of change, her voice remained a refuge for listeners seeking sincerity rather than spectacle. Ultimately, her story is less about solitude and more about self-understanding, less about separation and more about alignment with what mattered most. In every era, she demonstrated that music can be both companion and compass, guiding a life shaped by honesty, resilience, and grace.